Allison, will you please get us started for today's session?
Absolutely. So welcome to Highlights Foundation Gather. We're grateful to have Sarah Aronson and Nikki Grimes with us today. If this is your very first gather, welcome. Join in the community chat with the chat feature that's rolling right now. And if you have questions for Nikki and Sarah, you're going to want to put them in the Q&A feature. If this is your third or sixth or ninth gather, we welcome you back. It is always a beautiful time to be in the presence of Sarah Aronson and Nikki Grimes, in their words and in their characters and in their character. Sarah Aronson, as you know, writes everything from picture books to novels, and I've talked each week about that just like Rube Goldberg, because I can't imagine a better inspiration for your makers at home right now. But I do want to give another shout out to one of her starred reviews, and that is her teaching. Sarah is a generous teacher who turns enthusiasm into an art form. Thank you, Sarah, for teaching all of us and guiding us through this and being our Wednesday Gather host, and for all of the other wonderful things that you do. Welcome. So this will be a little difficult to introduce Nikki Grimes here, because a proper introduction of Nikki Grimes should take a whole hour. And we only have an hour here, so I've edited, I promise. Nikki Grimes, author of nearly 60 books for children and teens, has been recognized widely for her artistry, for the way she weaves words together, and the way she celebrates her readers within her story. Recognitions, starred reviews, ALA Children's Legacy Honor, Coretta Scott King Honors, NCTE Excellent in Poetry, Virginia Hamilton Award, the Seibert Honor, the Prince Honor, and this week I think I heard that Nikki Grimes was named the Assembly on Literature for Adolescents of NCTE winner for Outstanding Achievement in the field of adolescent literature. And these are just some of the celebrations of her body of work like Garvey's Choice and Meet Denitra Brown and Ordinary Hazards, to name very few favorites from her collection. We are honored to have Nikki with us today. Welcome to you, Nikki Grimes.
Thank you.
I'll be posting some links to Nikki and Sarah's books in the chat via shopping at the at bookshop.org, and you can click right on the links to check out their little libraries that are in Bookshop. And remember that really helps to support your local bookstores at this time. We'll take time now to enjoy this conversation between Sarah and Nikki, and then we'll get to as many questions as possible after they've had plenty of time to celebrate and chat and talk with one another. Thank you both again for being here. Let's get started.
I'm so delighted to be here, and congratulations, Nikki.
Thank you.
Hearing that news was so exciting, and it's so time. I loved Ordinary Hazards. It's a book that I read once fast because I just was filled with emotion, and then I read it again and slowed down so that I could appreciate your language and the heart that you put into those pages. That book will be read forever. It's wonderful.
Thank you.
So what we start with, we always have a word of the day. So if you would close your eyes, I'm going to show everybody the word for the day. If you say it, then everyone else can have some champagne to celebrate you. Okay? All right, so let's begin. Nikki, in this time of stay at home and working, many of us work from home anyway, how has your writing changed, and how are you dealing with writing at home, being an author at home?
Well, I'm always an author at home, so that hasn't changed. I'm doing little bits of writing more at this point. It's sort of blog posts. and articles and that kind of thing. Although I am frequently inspired to write a poem that's just for me. Those poems are always responses to whatever's going on in the world at that moment that really is on my mind, that maybe I don't want to talk about, but I have to. I just have to get it out of me. And so these poems push themselves out of me, and I generally post them on Facebook and Twitter. They're not for a collection or an anthology or whatever, although they sometimes end up being that later. But so I pulled up two recent poems that I wrote in that way. The talk of war too familiar, daily reports of the dead and dying, urban MASH units hastily assembled amid the cacophony of street fights over face masks and nurses loudly protesting a lack of ventilators. What fresh hell is this?
Wow.
Obviously not really for children.
No.
And then a second that addresses trying to write right now. A few snatches of words stop by for a visit, but the rest run for cover. They're in quarantine too, for now.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah.
Wow. Wow.
So,
But, last week, Heidi Stempel talked a lot about being kind to ourselves during this time when writing may be coming in snippets, may be coming, maybe just for ourselves. I mean, it's lovely that you're sharing them, but I mean, I'm looking at my journal and thinking, I need that journal right now just to make sense of what I'm seeing
exactly.
in this world for myself. Has poetry given you a way to embrace sort of the snippets of writing that in a way that allows you to be more kind to yourself?
Well, I give myself room to just spew on the page as I need to. Not all of it is going to be something that I share, but the process of doing that always shakes something loose and creates space for more of the intentional writing that I want to do in my books. And so I need, it's a pressure valve for me. It lets off the steam. And so I need to do that. In general, I'm learning that I have to, because I'm used to working at home and I'm used to being on a schedule. I'm a list person. I have a list for every day. And I, at one point after a few weeks, I realized I need to back away from that and create spaces of rest for myself where I can just sit and be quiet and go work in the garden, go cut some flowers or work in the earth or whatever, and allow myself that space to breathe, because breathing right now is really difficult to do. And so I have to create that space just to be emotionally and mentally healthy, whether I'm writing or I'm not. And also just to relieve myself of the pressure to produce right now. And just create that space where if there's something in me that wants to come out, there's room. I've created space for that to happen without being on some, putting myself on some ridiculous deadline. That's by the way.
Seriously, I've been finding that the only writing I can do right now is writing that is making me happy, that is no expectations from me or the world or anyone else, nobody watching. So writing just for me and writing just to please myself. And other than that, the book I thought I wanted to work on, the revisions that I know I need to work on, too much intention has not been my friend right now, that I've had to let that go a little bit and say that story's still there. It'll come back.
Exactly.
But right now I need to indulge this other part of my creativity. I'm actually I'm a list person, right? I'm actually a big list person as well. And I've actually started making schedules that include rest so that so that at the end of the day, I feel like if I've done a little bit, I've done what I said I would do, but I've also given myself that time to read, to rest, to cook. Hopefully soon in Chicago, it will be warm enough to have some flowers.
I do that too. I write things on my list because if it's not on the list, basically it doesn't exist. So I'll put,
That's right.
Read, garden. I need to add back in card making because the visual arts and textile help to keep me sane. So I always need to have a bit of that going on anyway. So yeah. The other
I love that.
I had to decide was that I will watch news once a day, twice at most, because constantly taking in this negative, and it's not as if we can do anything with the news we're getting. I mean, most of it we can't, and it's not healthy to fill my mind and my heart constantly with this information, with the death tolls and all that kind of thing. Like, I don't need to know that several times a day. I don't need to let that in. I need to stay informed, but I can be informed on a lot less than that.
I've actually stopped watching everything because the visual media has been triggering me in a way that reading once a day about the news is not.
Exactly.
So hearing their voices, hearing the same, we've gotten ourselves in this 24-hour news media of repeating ourselves over and over and over. And so nothing is new. There's no new news. And so going to the print media has just once a day and absolutely not at night has been a way of getting sleep, because sleep has been an issue too when our schedules are all off. And without sleep, there's no creativity. There's just, that does not work for me. I would like to go back to this idea of that you do art and that you're doing writing simultaneously. I love, this is something that I do as well. I love doodling and playing with a medium that, again, I don't have any expectations for. How does art feed your poetry and your writing?
Yeah, I'm not entirely sure. I just know, art involves seeing in new ways. And so there's definitely a correlation between that and poetry in terms of just opening me up for metaphor and symbolism. I find that the art is satisfying something in me that the writing doesn't. So for me, it's either or. I need both.
Oh, okay.
In some way. But yeah, I think definitely art helps me to see in new ways. Yeah.
I think that so you are painting, or what medium are you using?
I use watercolor and collage, and sometimes both together.
Cool.
Yeah. And draw. The cards are mostly collage. But I also
that's cool.
I can make handmade books and pads, and I'm a real paper freak, so I have a whole collection of art papers, and then I save papers from things that I got at an art gallery or museum, or something I see in a magazine that catches my eye. And so I have files and well, we won't talk about the bins of things I have in my garage. But anyway, I'm always pulling from. And the smallest little piece of paper I can make use of. So it's really hard for me to throw things away.
Right, right.
It's a little crazy making. But I love recycling, upcycling, all of that. I feel like I'm doing something for the earth at the same time as I'm creating art and feeding my soul. So all those things work together.
That's cool. For a while, I tried making clay pots. I tried the wheel, and I did not find that as satisfying as using paint. That the wheel, that this idea that either the pot worked or I threw it away, somehow did not, like, it just didn't work for me. So I ended up making like 11 olive bowls, which all looked the same. They were like all like perfect. And I never tried to go upward. And of course, like if we think of that as a metaphor for writing, I need to take that chance to make things wobbly. And I wasn't doing that in the pottery at all. So that's when I went back to drawing and painting. And that definitely helps me. I'm not sure it satisfies a need that writing does not satisfy, but I think it opens the portal to writing in a way that makes that journey of discovery a little bit more easy and a little bit more obvious for me. That when I'm painting, suddenly I realize, oh, that's what I need to. My intentional brain is like taking a break. And then my inspirational creative brain gets to say, oh yeah, that's what you want to do.
Yeah.
So there were lots of people who want to know about like just the mechanics of writing a poem or a novel in verse. And how do you start with one poem? And what is the leap you take to know that you have a subject that is ready for novel in verse?
Well, I don't come at it that way. I start off with story, because a novel in verse is, first of all, a story. And so that's really my focus. And what do I want to write a story about? Poetry is the tool I use to tell that story. But it's really about story. In fact, poetry is the last part of the process for me. I work on character development and backstory of the characters and voice and dialogue and all those kinds of things. I come up with a very skeletal framework for my story. And when I say skeletal, I mean like 1-2 sentences per chapter. And I'll start off with arbitrary number. There are going to be 10 chapters. I know there's going to be more than that, but I know that number 1 is going to be introduction. Number 10 is going to be resolution. Somewhere in the middle is going to be the arc. And then I'm fleshing out from there in between, what the connecting themes are. In between is going to lead me from one to the other. And decide on what each chapter is going to be about. Again, it just focuses on story, and write that out in a really brief way, just short paragraphs, until I have like 10 scenarios to start with. And then I'll start working from there. I'll do a draft. And then of course, when I've done that, then it's okay, what's the next thing I need to do? Well, I'm thinking about what transitions I need between 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. And that starts to grow the story. And along the way, I'll introduce a secondary character. Well, then I have to go back and develop that character's backstory, character sketch, and so on. So I'm moving back and forth in and out. With each draft, it's growing. It's getting longer and it's getting longer. And then when I feel okay, I'm far enough to start really tweaking and refining and shaping the poetry, then I start to do that. taking those paragraphs and just chipping away at it. I think of it very much like sculpture. So that paragraph is like my stone, and I just start whittling away until I, end up with the poem that I need. And, I'll go through easily 3-4 drafts until I feel that first rough draft is polished enough to send to someone.
Mm-hmm.
I have a reader. I have a couple of readers that I use even before I send anything to my editor, just because you need another pair of eyes. They'll see something I hadn't thought of or ask me questions that I need to consider. And so then I'll go through another draft, and then that one I'll finally send to the editor and wait for her questions, responses, whatever, before I go to the next stage. So it all starts with story, and to focus on story, I have to make sure I'm fulfilling the requirements of story before I worry about the poetry and the metaphor and all that. So, yeah, that's sort of my that's for a novel.
I find that really comforting, because of course story begins with story and begins with character, that you're not, that is the heart and the foundation of what we're all doing. And that the kind of writing we choose, whether it's in vignettes or in verse or in lengthy prose, that is in service to the story, because story is the boss.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And where people who try novels in verse get lost is they take existing poems and try to figure out how to cobble a story out of that. And that's ass backwards. You need to start with a story.
Right.
Start with
well, that's why I'm a big deleter.
Say, oh, that's why this works. Yeah, that's how it works.
Right. No, that's why I'm a big deleter, because sometimes I will take like this beautiful paragraph and I'm like, I've got to save that paragraph. And then that paragraph leads me astray. It's like, no, you have to find the story first, what your character wants. And each draft begets reimagined story that's deeper and deeper.
Exactly.
I just got notes from my agent on things that I had not achieved yet in the draft that she just read. And her questions, it's always a house of cards. Her questions are making me think, I don't know that character well enough. I have to go back in and go way back to that beginning where I thought about, what is this book about? What do I want to say? Why is she the character who is tugging at my heart?
I know when I was working on Words with Wings, which I originally, what was I going to say? I originally envisioned it as a picture book. And so I have this beautifully working picture book, and I gave it to Rebecca Davis, who did what she usually does when I send her picture books. Oh, this is a wonderful beginning.
Right.
I'm like, no. I sent you something. Yes, but I can see so much more. And then she starts asking me questions. And one of the questions she asked, which sparked me, was, why did Gabriella start daydreaming in the first place? And I'm like, I don't know. Because I had to go up and figure that out. And so that led me into all sorts of places. With Garvey's Choice, the question was, well, why does Garvey overeat in the first place? What led him to overeat? I'm like, I don't know. And then that eventually led me to this, what is now the heart of the story, the relationship with his father.
Right.
Which was never there in the beginning. But in the process of answering that question, I came up with this whole story that ended up being the heartbeat of the novel. So you kind of never know.
And just as an ode to the readers in our lives, when you have a good reader who can ask that kind of question and see what you have not grasped yet, and ask you the question in a way that does not feel threatening. It feels like doors opening. That's the kind of reader we want.
Oh yeah, they're gems. They're absolute
Yeah.
gems. I hate them in the moment, and I love them later on. I go back and I was like, thank you.
So how long do you wait between getting that big question and then putting the pencil to the page or the fingers to the keys?
It usually, I have to give myself a few days whenever I get an edit, because my initial response is always, what? What are you talking about? Who do you think you are? It's my story, that kind of thing. So I give myself a day to kind of do that. And I have my like little tantrum. And then the following day I'll go back and read again and I'm like, yeah, that's a good idea.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. All right. And there invariably are things I don't agree with that I never agree with all the way through. But there are those things that after I calm down and get out of my head and put my ego aside, that I see, this is smart, this is wise, this is good.
Yeah. Putting the ego aside is literally the nothing happens until the ego goes and sits with your internal editor and you got to go have a chat, you two, and leave me alone.
Yeah. You have to do that, because otherwise you hang on to whatever is precious to you that may or may not serve the story. So you have to get out of it enough to see that, to recognize that, and essentially get out of your own way.
Right. It's really an interesting little contradiction, because you have to have enough ego and confidence, so confidence being the better word, that you can write that book, that it's your book to write, but not enough ego to think you can do it all in one shot.
Mm-hmm.
So we are constantly battling ourselves and our own sort of desire for product, and going back then to the process and saying, I am a servant to the story.
Exactly.
What do I need today?
Exactly.
Yeah. It's amazing. It's amazing that doesn't change, that as we continue to write, that we still need those moments. I know that when I first started, I used to color code I started color coding my feedback into green, the stuff I loved, yellow, the stuff I wasn't sure about, and red, the stuff I thought was totally wrong. And what always happens is I do the green, and then the yellow sort of just gets worked in there, and then the red gets answered too, because while I'm satisfying that sense of brain, I'm also opening the door to let those words affect me and make those changes.
So I find that a similar process, in that I start with whatever is easiest.
Mm-hmm.
I work my way up to what's difficult. And part of doing that, the reason to do that for me is to not get stuck somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
You have some hard thing that you're wrestling with, and then you never get to any of the other writing. So I start off with what is easiest and work my way to what's more difficult. And then I'm able to, get through it. And in general, I tend to approach my work like a jigsaw puzzle, and I focus on the pieces. I don't worry about initially how it's all going to fit together. But I'll work on the pieces that are sparking me. I'm like, okay, I'm ready to work on this, and I'll go ahead and write that piece and go to the next thing that sort of sparks me. And that way, actually get the work done, get to the end of it. Whereas if I'm trying to do it in sequence, that never works for me. So it's just too easy to get stuck.
Yeah, getting stuck is, I think that's the question that more young readers ask me than anything else. What do you do when you get stuck? And if you have a system for not getting stuck, then you don't get stuck. Do you ever get stuck?
Well, everybody does it someplace. I find, for instance, if I'm going through a draft and I'm looking for fresh metaphor. And I'm not quite sure where, what I want to do. I find it helps to sort of look at what the subject matter is. I'll find it there. I remember one of my favorite metaphors, and it's in a book by Anne Martin, A Dog's Life, the autobiography of a stray. And she has a description, and of course it's all from the dog's point of view, right? And there's a place where the dog describes a crescent moon as looking like a cat's claw.
Wow.
And I thought, that's brilliant. Of course, that's what it would look like to a dog. So kind of go back to the subject, whatever that subject is, and sort of look at it from that perspective is helpful to me. I've also, I was working on Anissa Lee and the Weaver's Gift, and I wanted to do a poem about spinning yarn. Couldn't come up with a way to get into it. So I called a friend of mine who spins yarn, went to her house and watched her working on a handheld spinner and then sitting down at the spinning wheel. And I just observed her. And I realized in watching her work on the wheel that the movement reminded me of dance. So the dance then became the metaphor for this poem.
Lovely.
At other times, I'd suggest making good use of dictionary and thesaurus. Sometimes when I'm stuck, I will look up the keyword in the dictionary, and through all of the shades of meaning that are offered there, and usually something will spark an idea from that. And if I haven't gotten it there, then I go on to the thesaurus for the same reason, looking up all the shades of meaning of that particular word, and I'll come away with a means of attack, and that'll just kind of blow things open for me. So those are a couple of tricks that I use.
Yeah, sometimes when I'm writing in prose, that I look for an object for the same reason as for looking for a metaphor, is that I look around and think, well, what is in my character's room? And I draw the room and think about what are the trophies, what are the things she has framed on her wall or taped to her wall? What are the things that she hides under her bed? And when I find something that tickles my imagination a little bit, then I can think about how does that object show up anywhere else? And is it important? And what can it mean? And that can sometimes open the door to more creativity. I'm always trying to get out of my thinking brain, my nemesis, and into my creative brain where I'm flowing and free and can do lots of things. So sometimes we need to hold on to something, a meaning, a word, an object that will help take us to that next place. What are you working on now? Or don't you have a new book out? Can we talk about your book with Wendell?
Southwest Sunrise. Wendell and I have been wanting to do a book together for years and years. And at one point I called Wendell and I said, I don't think a publisher is ever going to pair us up. So let's just go ahead and do something on our own. So then we had to figure out what our subject was going to be. And that ended up being fairly easy because both he and I are obsessed with the Southwest. We've both spent a lot of time there and just love that whole region. So I was like, let's do it on the Southwest. So then I had to come up with a storyline that incorporated that. And what excited me about it was one of the things I've been sort of fighting against for years is to get beyond the single story of the African-American child, right? Everything is always, edgy and it's urban and, they tend to be problem stories. And whenever you try to come in with something that doesn't fit within that framework, you're told that the work is not authentic, it's kind of pushed away. So I've been wanting to do something nature related for years because I love nature, I garden. Even before I was a gardener, I think in my last apartment in New York, I had like 70 plants.
Wow.
because just living things matter to me. And, you know, having them around me, it's important, and, you know, has been since childhood. So, so I really kind of wanted to push against that. So this is the first such picture book that I was able to place and sell. I got really excited about it. So now I'm planning on doing others within that sort of framework. But yeah, so it's exciting.
That is exciting. And I'm so glad that our world is opening its doors to more and more diverse stories and more authors and more illustrators, that that my reading has become more interesting. And I feel, you know, sort of empowered to think about, you know, Jewish stories, and that they're not all about the same thing. They're not all about the Holocaust. They're not all about bar mitzvah. There are stories about Jews that go beyond that. And I'm so glad to have the ability, the invitation now to look for some of those stories. You did a lot of that hard work for for our community for many years.
You're welcome.
So I'm going to segue to our lightning round, which is the fun part. Oh, well, you may disagree. Fast answers to silly questions. All right.
Okay.
Chocolate cake or apple pie?
Oh. Not my favorite pie, but okay, apple pie.
Apple pie, all right. Are you listening, Amanda? Apple pie. Pen, pencil, or computer?
Oh, pen.
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 Pen. What is the one superficial thing you cannot live without during this pandemic?
Gelato.
Hair color. And last night was the finale of Schitt's Creek. Great series. It made me start thinking about favorite endings of books, movies, or series. Do you have a book, movie, or series with a favorite ending?
Oh. Not that I can grab right now. I can't think of one.
All right. I mean, I will say that I always look for chances to push the carrot seed, best ending ever. But also, I really like the ending of 6 Feet Under, and now I really want to watch it again. After watching Schitt's Creek, I was like, I think I need to go back to 6 Feet Under or The Sopranos. Whatever. Anyway, let's take some questions some burning questions from the audience. Here's from Dorothy. Can you use 2 lines of rhyme, then another line not rhyme, 2 more lines of rhyme? What are the rules for rhyming, according to you?
Interestingly enough, whenever I do workshops, the first thing I say is that rhyme is not allowed in this workshop. Because rhyme is very difficult. So many people talk about rhyme as a default, as if rhyme is poetry, and rhyme is only one element of poetry. There are so many others. And in general, I really prefer internal rhymes. Yeah, myself.
For those who do not know, what is an internal rhyme?
Well, when the rhyme falls in the middle of the sentence, not at the end, middle of the verse. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. But I in general, though, I want to encourage people to mix it up in poetry, to look at and explore all different forms and to try them, challenge yourself. Even if you end up, you know, most of your work is going to be free verse, or it's going to be, you know, whatever the other form is that you find you're most comfortable with or that works for you. If you explore and challenge yourself to try different forms, it's going to strengthen the work that you do and enhance whatever form you end up writing in. And so for myself, I think in any given book, I'll have haiku, I'll have tanka, I might have a golden shovel poem. I like to mix up the forms. And in My Man Blue, which was largely a collection of free verse, it included a sonnet. In Ordinary Hazards, included several haiku throughout the course of the book. So I love to mix it up. I think it strengthens the work.
Yeah, I mean, I was just saying that last night about point of view, is that if you're not exploring different points of view while you're figuring out your story, then you don't know your whole story. That
Right.
here is a way to experiment and look and see different things that you wouldn't normally see if you are just going at it from one particular way. We're living in a time where editors are inviting us to be experimental.
Mm-hmm.
And so why not? This is what the process of writing really invites us to do, is to try new things, not just try and hammer out a product as quickly as possible.
Exactly.
So Kristen
we think about our own work as product anyway. That's the way the world looks at it and the publishers look at it, and that's fine. But we need to be thinking about story and what inspires us and what moves us. Not about product. We need to be thinking about literature. We're creating literature.
Product is stagnant, it's finished, it's done. And process is an open door. It means that things can change.
Exactly.
It means that you're engaged, and it's a lot. Think about how we want the reader to anticipate and to even add to it with their reading to the book. The book is different for them, for each reader.
Exactly.
Yeah. So really that when your prose are that alive, it's really like, that's what you hear from readers. They tell you what they think you were trying to do, and you had no idea you were doing that.
Mm-hmm.
Kristen is interested in some of your influences, writers, writing, time periods, anything that influenced your craft.
The first, let's say 2 or 3 authors who I clung to were Khalil Gibran for poetry, and also just his spirituality spoke to me. I walked around with a beat up copy of The Prophet in my back pocket forever. And James Baldwin was really important to me. Although he wasn't a poet, there was so much lyrical about his writing, and also his characters are so authentic, and the dialogue was just so rich. And you read his novels and you meet these people and you expect to see them on the street. They're that authentic, and they step right off the page. And so that, spoke to me. And Doris Lessing, also her work would always shake something loose. I had a hard time finishing her books because I'd read a few chapters and then I'd run and get my notebook because I have to write, because she stirred up something in me, Yeah. So those were
That's cool.
Yeah. And then strictly in terms of poetry, the poets of the Harlem Renaissance, because I grew up, partially in Harlem, and was introduced to those poets really early on. And so they had an impact on me as well.
Cool. Jennifer Gennari says, love the discussion about novels in verse. So is the backstory for each character written not in verse in your drafting, or are you writing in verse to get to know your characters?
No, it's all prose, just, yeah. And the backstory isn't something that anyone will see. I will do a full backstory on each character just to understand why they are the way they are. If I say a character is, shy or whatever, I don't want to it's not enough for me to say that they're shy or that they're frightened or, depressed or whatever. I have to get into what made them that way. What happened? What was the spark for that? What was the origin of that? And I need to know that so that when I put them in a situation, as an author, I understand how they're going to respond to any given stimuli based on that backstory. So, I'm just writing that in straight prose and in my notebooks. But then I'll periodically will go back to those bits and draw out pieces that I need for the story that I'm writing.
Linda Dickman wants to know, what was your first novel in verse, and when did you know it had to happen in verse?
I think the first crack at it was Bronx Masquerade, which of course was poetry and prose. And I didn't know that that's what it was going to be. It took me a minute to figure that out. But I knew that I wanted both, because I wanted to explore sort of the difference between who we really are inside and what mask we present to the world. And so it felt like I needed to do that in two different forms in order to really make that clear. So you have the poetry, which is really more speaking from the heart, and the prose. So it was kind of moved back and forth. But yeah, so I knew that that's what I wanted to do. That was also the trickiest thing, because there were 18 characters in that book. And the poetry, I needed to write the poetry from the perspective and in the voice of each of those characters, and not in my own voice. And that was the most challenging thing to do. But in the end, it was the most satisfying.
I remember as a brand new writer, not so young, I read that, and I think my advisor at Vermont said, "Now don't go trying that yet, Sarah. Give them a little bit of time. Like, I know you love it, but you need to learn one narrator first, and then you can figure out who about your ensemble cast of characters. Slow down, sister." So do you yearn to go back to a more rigid schedule, or are you learning something from this less rigid schedule that you're on right now that you hope to incorporate when we can all hug again?
Well, I'm still somewhat rigid. I'm working on loosening up still. But I had already so much on my plate before this all happened. And then some places have just been pivoting from physical conferences or school visits, whatever, to virtual. So a lot of the work was still there, just doing it in different ways and figuring out how to do that. And just also working through the how-tos of the technology. In the beginning, I was creating learning material for teachers and families to use at home and that kind of thing, and ran into problems of trying to upload them because everyone is on their computers. So I've sort of backed off from that for now anyway. But I think I'm learning the importance of slowing my roll with each day, not sort of, because I'm used to sort of hitting the ground running, going through, my how-to, my to-do list, checking off. So I've kind of slowed that down and, okay, no, let's spend a little more time meditating at the beginning of the day. And let's create these spaces to go out and enjoy nature or whatever it is. Having to prepare 3 meals a day has slowed me down too. I'm not looking forward to ever having to do that again once we're out of this. I have to say, but slowing down in general, it's been a good thing to just slow,
Yeah, I mean, I think I started making it like a little comic strip called Extrovert Inside, because at first I was so almost panicky about slowing down. And this week, I think acceptance came, and my pace is slower, and I'm enjoying it.
Mhm.
And I'm listening more to sometimes to nothing, but also to music. And that things that I had forgotten that I wanted to do as a writer, I'm now being able to do because that space has opened up. And,
I'm
and
listening to music more than I have in a long time. And that's
yeah,
really been good. Like, oh,
yeah,
I've been missing this. Yeah.
yeah,
Because one
same.
of those things, well, I don't have time for that. And so yeah, it's good to slow and learn to take breaths.
That's right. And to embrace that silence, that the silence is not, that's not scary,
Yeah.
that the silence is actually welcoming. I think I'm going to dedicate my next book to Savasana, because I'm doing the virtual yoga. And when I lie down and it's quiet in the house and nobody's getting up around me, I'm able to find more ideas and more interesting things to think about, and like little breadcrumbs to follow than I would be if I was getting up really fast and running out the door to the next thing. There's nothing waiting for me except my mat. So now I have it. I just want to answer Pam's question. This is not beer. Um, it is a Martinelli sparkling cider to celebrate Nikki. And some of the questions my agent asked me with this draft were about the emotional connections that the main character feels that propels her to do things that make her uncomfortable. And at those junctures, and I thought this was really interesting advice, that she asked me to look at those junctures, and let's make this a writing exercise. Look at where your character must make a big decision. Is there an emotional connection to what triggers the big decision and what follows after that? Or are you expecting the reader to just watch from a distance and see what is happening and accept it? We need to feel that struggle and that contradiction and that motivation that will make that character get out of their own skin and try something new. I thought I'd done that, and I have not. So that's what I'm going to tackle today, is to think about what she's feeling in those moments.
I'm always thinking about how to make an emotional connection with the reader. It's my number one goal in any story I tell, is I want to make that connection. And it always involves me digging deep and sometimes going places I don't necessarily want to go, to find the way to do that in terms of precision of language, in terms of the pacing of it. When I wrote Isolation Station in Ordinary Hazards, that was a poem I really needed to do that with. And I knew I wanted the reader to catch sort of the breathlessness and the intensity of that moment that the character was experiencing. And I found doing like a series of run-on sentences that went across the page helped me to sort of get to that. And also it was definitely a pacing thing. The house was full, but with strangers, and I was there by myself in the dark in a tiny pocket of a room with a tiny bed to sleep in, and little space for the fears I'd packed in my suitcase, which makes no sense because why would I bring them with me? And the night sounds foreign to the city girl left me tossing and turning. There was no more room in my head to hold the anger rising like steam, searing the edges of my brain. There was not even a shelf where I could stack the questions, crying out for answers that wouldn't come. Why did Mom love liquor more than Carol, more than me? Why did Daddy let strangers take us away? Why did Grandma refuse to come to our rescue? Why didn't they love us? Why didn't anyone love us enough? Why? Stop! I leapt out of bed, switched on the light, grabbed a piece of paper and a pen, stabbed at the page, and let my thoughts gush like a geyser, shooting high into the moonless sky, then falling down on the page I held captive till every line was stained with my feelings, and the heat of them finally had a chance to cool, and suddenly I could breathe, breathe, breathe. And there was once again room enough in my head and my heart to just be. Then I closed my eyes and it was morning. And I don't know how many times I rewrote the draft of that poem physically to get it to a place where I felt the reader would get that. Because that's what you want. You want the reader to be able to get as much as possible on their own without you in the room to explain anything. I mean, that really is the goal. And when you're dealing with those emotional moments, that's when it's the biggest challenge, I think, to do that. Yeah.
Thank you for reading that. That was amazing.
Thanks. And so much of getting it right, for me at least, is reading out loud. I know when something is working or not working when I hear it, because our eyes will fool us, but our ears won't.
True.
So.
Thank you, Nikki.
I feel ready to write.
So thank you. That was a touching. The whole session, the comments are just blowing up with thank you and wow and keep going and keep going. So thank you both. It was great. So great. Quick shout out. I did see Chris Tebbets is on there, and you were talking about what to do when you get stuck. We just took Chris's Getting Your Middle Grade Novel Unstuck workshop and converted it to an online gathering that we'll be hosting in May, and Jeff just posted that to our website. So great workshop. Thank you. Thanks for being a part of the Highlights Foundation. It's been great to see the whole community here. Allison, anything else before we go?
I don't think I can speak right now. It was beautiful. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. It was fun.
Thank you. Thank you, Nikki, for joining us and sharing your words and your ideas. This means so much to me.
Thank you. It was fun.
We'll see you all Friday with Shadra and Mike Curato. Thank you.
All right.
Can't wait.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.